to animate our character in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, one of the things that we will want to do first before we get involved in this is change one of the preference settings. And the preference setting, which I have already changed but is not on by default, is making a window active when the mouse enters it. So if I move my mouse into any one of my active windows, you will see it gets the red perimeter on it, indicating that is the current active window. And we will need that so some of our keyboard shortcuts will function properly later on. And we do this by going under Harmony Essentials, Preferences, and in the Preferences we will choose General. And what we will do is it starts out where it says Focus on Mouse Enter, and that is not selected. So I'm going to select that so that it's now selected, and I will choose OK. And now we should see when I move my mouse into any one of the windows that it becomes the active window. That's useful because the keyboard shortcuts are often tied to the active window. So 1 and 2 on my keyboard allow me to zoom in and zoom out. And currently my active window is the camera view. If I switch over to my timeline, then I can use 1 and 2 to zoom in and out as well. So we want to know which is our current active window. Sometimes it does require you to quit and relaunch Harmony for this effect to start working. So if you set the preference setting and it's not working, quit, relaunch, and then it should function. The character has been set up for lip syncing. So if I go to the mouth layer, I can use the square brackets to cycle through the different mouth shapes that I have. If I go onto my right hand layer, I will see that, or maybe it's the left hand layer. The left hand has a couple of different options available to it. So we can work with that as well. So we will be utilizing those. So currently my artwork is set up. I have a bunch of layers. And as I look at these different layers, I've also noticed that I have a lot of different colors. One thing that's really useful in Harmony is that colors, when they are on a color palette, are assigned a unique ID number, and anywhere in the project that color has been used, if I update the color in my color palette, it will update all instances of that in my project. So everywhere that I use this blue, if I decide that that's not the blue that I want, I can look through and find that blue color, double click, pulls up my color window, and now if I want to change that color, you will see how it's affecting everything. So everywhere that I am currently using that color, it is now working. If I decide that my character really should have even oranger hair, and some of the layers have been named properly, some still need a finished naming, but I could go through and modify that coloring in my project. So it's nice that we have access to modify the colors as we go. An additional color to the hair, so I've selected this color and I will name it. So it is named, and now I will add a new color. The nice part is whatever color is currently active, when you add a new color, that is the color it bases it off of. So now that I've done that, I can now go and pull and create a new color. And I'll call this my hair body, and that'll make sense in a moment when I use it with the paint bucket. So if I go find my main hair layer and fill it, it's now filled with the hair body, so we can see how it emphasizes the two-tone hair. If I want to recolor this so it's not quite that color, I could choose something else, so make it more subtle or more dramatic. I think I want to make it a little yellower and a little dirtier. as well. To remind you of a few keyboard shortcuts while we are working here that will come in handy this class is H and J allow me to move up and down through my layers. So H and J, we can see I'm going up through my layers. When I'm on a layer with additional drawings, such as the mouth, the square bracket keys allow me to cycle through those frames.
So why would you guys say?
The next thing we need to do once we've determined that we have all of our layers, everything is happy where we want it, and all is right and good with the universe, we want to turn off Animate. Because when Animate is on, it will automatically be entering in keyframes as we adjust or try and move artwork around. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want keyframes to happen when I go and grab a layer and move its pivot point. When I go and grab a layer and move it across the screen. Because you will notice when I look at a layer such as the arm here, that I want to relocate that so it's attached to his body. I want to adjust and move these layers around, and if Animate, the little running man, is turned on, at that point it will be adding in keyframes for every change that I make. But I don't want it to add keyframes. I want these changes to be permanent. And then I will add keyframes as I move to Animate. But first, to rig up this character, we want Animate off. So I click on the running man so he is turned off. By default, it usually is on or active in your program when you launch it. So we have to manually make sure we turn that off. Now what we will need to do is to establish our pivot points for our pieces of artwork. Or we can move the art. Actually, we should move the pieces over and then establish their pivot points. But both, well, it'll be easier to do these with the pivot points while they're out. And to set the pivot points, the best way to set it so that it creates a permanent pivot point adjustment. Because right now, if I go to animate, say this arm, and try and move it, you'll see it's moving around this point. And that point happens to line up with over here, which is the center of my screen, sort of. It was in the center when it was part of this arm and drawn. So we can see there's a section in the center. So if I select this arm and try and rotate, it's not rotating around the shoulder, it's rotating around what was the middle of the screen. So we don't want that. So we need to adjust those pivot points. And while I have the transform tool active, which is a really useful tool for doing my animation, if I adjust the pivot point here, and now it animates at the shoulder, and hey, look at that, that's great. Now if I go and click on a different layer and then go back to the arm, you'll see that that pivot point is right back to where it was, back in the middle of the screen. So that's not working. So that is why when we are animating or rigging our character for animation, we first will want to establish our pivot points. And we can establish these pivot points by pulling up our advanced animation toolbar. And we can put that across the very top of our screen or in the lower section down here. It all depends on how you want your screen to be oriented. The advanced animation toolbar, the key thing I'm looking for is right up here, which is all of the functionality of my transform tool. But they're singled out, and if I use the rotate tool in my advanced animation toolbar and drag this over to the shoulder, at that point, if I click on another layer and set that up, I'll drag that over to the elbow. I'm hitting escape to deselect my layer. Now I go back and we can see that that pivot point has indeed maintained its relationship. I can go to the hand and drag the pivot point over to the wrist. I can click on the other hand, repeat the process. So this is rigging our character. the first thing we want to do is we want to establish pivot points for all of our artwork layers. Now, a few layers you may have questions about of where should I put the pivot point for the torso? And that depends on the character. Some characters you will put it at the neck, some you will do it down in the groin, others you will set it at the belly button. So it really depends on if you anticipate rotating or moving this torso, at what point or position do you want it to bend? So I think I want to have a point somewhere around here so that if it moves, I think that's going to give me the kind of movement that I want, and that corresponds about to the waist. Can go to the head. The head, we usually want to put the pivot point at what would be about the base of the skull or the base of the neck so that the head can rotate on that point. Now for the comb over, for this I want to set the pivot point kind of at the part in the hair so that as it moves, we get a little bit of movement occurring with it. I think that will add a little bit of fun into the animation. The normal hair, I don't think that's really going to move, but I'll just give it the same pivot point approximately as the head, because some of these parts are going to be made into children, so we'll have a parent-child relationship between layers, so that if I move the upper arm, it moves the lower arm and hand, much like what we looked at last session. Now if I go into a leg, again, set the pivot point for the upper leg about it around the hips. Lower leg, put it around the knee. And the foot we'll put right around the ankle. So we're effectively setting up a skeleton relationship to our body parts, and then we will link them together. So all the limbs have had their points reassigned. Now we'll notice that I have the eyes. The eyes I'm not going to worry too much about because the eyes are going to end up getting a peg attached to them. So we will be mostly doing this with nested layers, parent-child layers, but we will have to use a peg for certain movements so that we can move the eyes as a unit easily. So we'll look at how we're doing that a little bit later. And don't worry about the layer that says eyes cutter right now. If we turn off the eyes themselves and turn off the eyes layer, we'll see that I still have these the whites of the eyes, and we're using those as a mask. So the cutter is Harmony's term for a mask. And we will set up a mask so that we can make the eyes animate inside the whites of the eyes. And that will be fun because that allows us to really have character starting to happen. The pivot point set, the next thing that we are going to do is start to build our layer hierarchies. You can work top to bottom, bottom to top, doesn't really matter. Now if I click on the foot, if I hit spacebar, it does give me access to moving around on my screen. I can use my scroll wheel, or I can use 1 and 2 to zoom in and out as necessary. So as you see here, I have my 3 leg layers. To build in my parent-child relationship, I will take the lower leg, drag it to the upper leg layer so it becomes a child, drag the foot to the lower leg, and now we can see that we have some movement changes to take into account here. Now all of this is easy to correct because I can very easily now grab and just drag a layer over as part of it. I can grab both layers and drag those over as needed. And now I have a leg that if I grab my animation tool, I can now swing from the hip. And with that, I have another key command at my disposal, which is B and Shift B. So if the foot is active, if I hit B, it now moves up my hierarchy chain, and we can see that happening inside my layer on my timeline. If I hit B again, it goes further up that chain. So that allows me to quickly move my way around my chain to work on building my animation so that I can start to set things together. So now I can go and put the leg over. Now I will notice that this leg, the left leg, which is on top of the body, I will want that further down on the body, so I will need to move this whole group further down my layers list here. And I can do that by simply dragging until it is all the way at the bottom. And now if I look at my artwork, we'll see how that leg does indeed sit behind the front leg. One leg is done. Now if I move on to the other leg, I can start dragging those body parts down, connecting that. Now I can see the right hand, but the right lower arm goes to the right upper arm, the right hand goes to it. So that's now been connected. Now when I do the left one, I will see some potential changes where it moves things around on screen. And the reason that it's doing this shifting around on screen is the left arm and left leg were copies of the right that I moved over so that I could see them separate from the body. And because I did that, these are now being, it's a cumulative offset. So I moved this arm over, so now it's moving the other part over doubly and the other part over again. So it's causing that change. But we can very easily move our layers back as we want to get them squared away, knowing that we have our correct relationship with our body parts. And then I can now stick that arm, which should be behind the body, but if I look at it, we will see that that arm is not behind the body, but is in front of it. So I need to repeat the same process I did on the other leg. So if I just move my layers so I can see what I'm doing, I will grab the arm and I will pull that down. So we have what would be, they're called left, not because they're the left arm of our character, but because they're the arm and leg that appear on the left side of our screen. So now if I move that arm, we can see how now he's doing some arm action. And then if I move out through my chain using Shift B to move to the hand, B moves back up to the shoulder. So Shift B to move the hand, and then with the hand selected, I can give Trump, my orange-haired character, I can cycle through different hands as needed. So I have two arms, or one arm and two legs done. Now it's time, almost time. I missed a foot on the right leg. So there's the foot. So now I have a right leg done. Now to do the other arm, drag the layers in. So I have both legs, both arms completed on my character. Now I will want my arm to be sitting in front of the head as we are doing this so I can leave this layer up. So we can see how it goes in front. And currently this is going to work. We may have to do some changes to the arm in a little bit to adjust our layering so that our layers maintain the relationship that we're looking for. Looking at the remaining layers that I have, I will notice how these layers and how they're arranged. I need to do some modifications. I need to pull the torso down on my list because currently the neck is sitting on top of the head and I really don't want it there, so I will pull it below so now we can see the whole head. That enables that the head, we can do some movements, but currently we can see that we need to attach the other body parts or parent the rest of the items to the head so that when the head moves, the hair, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and bangs all shift with it. So we do need to make that change happen. To move those around, we want all of those to be children of the head, but that's going to cause a problem because when I start putting those items down, so if I put items down onto the head, well, notice how the nose just disappeared. I pull the hair down, the hair just disappeared. Or the hair should have disappeared, but I missed when I pulled it down. But if we do it one layer at a time, I do run into the problem it's really easy for layers to become children of other layers that I don't want. So my preference is not to do it in that manner. So I want the nose, I want the hair and bangs to, I think, be on top of everything for the face. So first I'm going to move those up a little higher in the list. And now if I shift select all of these layers, so I've shift selected bangs, hair, the left eye, right eye, the eye cutter, the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So I've grabbed all of those layers, and now if I drag those onto head, they all become children of the head. The problem is now the head is technically sitting on top of them, and we want to push it behind. And we can do that through a process called nudging. Nudging is accomplished by holding down the Option or Alt key on your keyboard and then using the up arrow or down arrow. If you hold down Option and hit the up arrow, it will push a group or a single layer back. If you hold the down arrow, it pulls it forward. Now, in Harmony Essentials, we have no numerical information about this change that we're doing. When you have Harmony Premium, we are able to look up at the coordinates. So we have an additional option called coordinates that we can access. In the coordinates, we will actually be able to see this Z position information, and it will tell us that we are shifting things not 1 pixel, but 1/100th of a pixel, so 001. So that change, if we do nudges, will have no effect on scale relationships as we move things forward and back in our Z space, but it's enough that then objects will be in front or behind each other. But it's nice to be able to see those numbers, so then when you totally hose up your Z indexing or nudging, you can fix it numerically, much easier. So in this version, my recommendation is before you do any nudging, hit save, because you may want to go back and make a change. And to access changes, our undo option, if we click it in our toolbar, you will see it shows all of the changes that we've just made. that's how we can now undo it with some control. So with all of these active, I need my camera window to be my active screen. And now if I hold down the Option key and hit the down arrow, it nudged all of those layers forward, which is super cool. When I was trying to do this with these layers active, to nudge them, if I click up here to make this window active, it deselects them. But if my active window is my timeline, nudging doesn't work. I can only nudge when my camera window is the active window. And this is why we, at the beginning, at our preference, under General, to focus on mouse enter, so that I can just move my mouse into the camera window. The red line tells me it's active, and then I can do my nudging. It does seem that not only do we have to have the camera window active, if we wish to nudge our layers, we also need to have the transform tool active. If we have the select tool active, nudging does not work. So I need the transform tool active. So if I check out my arm, I'll notice that the arm is now going behind the hair and the face because I've nudged those forward in my Z space. Well, it does look kind of cool. I mean, with the orange purplish color, he's looks very superhero-esque, but it's not what we want. So we can fix this by nudging. So leaving this arm over the face so I can see what is happening with it. It looks a little disturbing, but if I hold down the Option key and then hit the down arrow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, we can see now the arm has landed in front and can properly animate around the body. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to fix the eyes so that they work a little bit better with what we see going on here. And to that end, we can see we have all of these different layers here. One of these layers is called Eye Cutter. If I turn off my eyes, the eyes themselves, left and right eye, and the eyes layer, we'll see that I have one layer remaining. That layer is my whites of the eye. And we're using that as a mask. And Harmony calls that a cutter. So it refers to a mask as a cutter. It's going to cut it out. And we will want to set this up. We'll see how it works. And this system that they did put into Essentials is pretty cool. It's pretty easy to do basic cutting operations. More complex cutting, it's easier to do in Premium in the Node version. But for simple cutting like we need for the eye, this works out pretty well. Notice this is the white of the eye. If I turn on the rest of the eye layer, we'll see that there's also the stroke around the eye. And we needed to separate that. So I drew the eyes, filled it with the white, and then I copied the white, and then I pasted that into a new drawing layer to be the white of the eye. Now with my right eye selected, I am going to, in my layers window, click on the plus and scroll down to Effects and then choose Cutter. And that now adds in a cutter. Now what that cutter does is it is a mask. And if I click on the plus next to the cutter, it opens up and says Matte Drop Layer Here. So what I will do is I will take my eye cutter, drop that where it says Drop Layer Here, and we'll see it cut it out. It did it backwards, but that's easy to fix. I will be repeating this process on the left eye so that it is easy to follow along the second time through. To make this cutter perform correctly, what I am going to do is double click on the star, and that pulls up the properties for that cutter. And what I want to do is I want to invert it. And now you can see how the eye sits beautifully inside the head. So now if I select the right eye, I can move it well, select the right eye. I can move it and it stays inside. It's being masked by that shape, which was the white of my character's eye. The process with the left eye. Click on the left eye layer. Click on the layers, add an item, go to effects, go to cutter. It adds in the cutter. Click on the plus on the cutter layer and it now says drop layer here. And I will take my cutter and drag that over. We can see again it's backwards. The mat is inverse of what we want, so I need to invert that mat by double clicking on the star. Click on inverted and close. Now we can see it lines up. I want to take this eye, and while it works here, I want to make it a little bit smaller. So I am going to scale it down a little bit. I want it to be a little bit smaller since this is the rear eye. Eyes cut. Now what I want to do is I want to group it that each eye usually moves independently. So each eye will normally move because both eyes will move together. Based on this view, I will move each eye one more than another. So if I go to animate the eyes, I don't just grab a single control peg and move it and it moves both of them because it will move one too far. So I generally have to move them individually. So I can go to the eye, and I never set their pivot point earlier, but I can do so now. And I can set the pivot point for each eye. Setting it into the middle of the eye. Now we could add in a control peg if we wanted, so that we could do a base movement that would move both, and then we could move them individually as well. So that is another option that we could explore as part of it, because otherwise I can move one eye and then move the other, or select them both and move them as a unit, because we don't really want one to be the parent and one to be the child. We're generally going to be moving them individually, and as you move to a more profile view, you typically will squish the eye a little bit to make it look like it's more elliptical in shape as we're looking at it from a profile view versus the more frontal view. So I can see that right now it's moving it too much when I move them together in my character. Now that I have successfully parented my layers, I have modified the layers with nudging so that I have things in front that I want in front, things in back that I want in back. I am just going to check the right arm and verify one more time that it is indeed in front of everything, and we can see how he's now covering up his body. That's good, or face. That's good. Now what I want to do is add in a master peg to control everything. And the best way to do this is to click off of everything, and then I click and choose peg, and it adds in a peg. I'm going to rename this master -P. Now, if I have a scene with multiple characters, then I will want to append this naming with the character as well. And this now gives us a control peg, and we will situate this where we need it in a moment. A control peg is much like a pivot point. It's the point of transformation for a given group that's associated with that peg. Now the color card, don't care about that. We can leave that down at the bottom, but I don't want that to be part of it. So with my master peg right here, I am going to select all of my layers except my color card. And the color card is in there as a placeholder until I get in real background artwork. If I had real background artwork, that would be on a group of layers, and that would be by itself, and it would be set. So I'm selecting all of my character layers. So my right upper leg, my right upper arm, my head, my torso, my left upper arm, my left upper leg. Grab those layers, and I'm dragging those onto my master peg. Or trying to, at least. There we go. And now they are parented to my master peg. With that, it's going to make animation a whole lot easier because now I have more room to see what I am doing. By default, that master peg is going to position itself in the middle of my screen. I'm going to turn off my color card so I can see there's the frame of my document, that faint gray line right there. That indicates the boundaries of my animation. So currently he's being cut off about at the knees. First, what I'm going to do is just pull him up so he's on screen. And the typical place, it does depend on the character, but most times people position the master peg around the feet of the character. That is a common place for putting it there, so that if I were to, say, rotate a whole character, it makes more sense to be rotating near the ground. So most of the time you will put it somewhere near the bottom of your character. Different characters will have different requirements, but that is standard. Now, if I want to animate this character across time or make him move, currently nothing I'm doing is setting up a keyframe. It's not doing anything. It's just there. We're set. So what I can do is to start animating using the animation tool. If you notice, I collapsed all of my layers that are part of this peg. But before we start animating, a really good thing to do would be to save and then follow that up with save as new version. So what this does is this will create a second document inside your project folder that uses all the same assets, but it allows you to be able to go back to this original one and branch off differently. Instead of doing save as and saving it where you have two project folders, I'll just do save as a new version, and this will be my character, and I will call this kick. So he's going to kick at something. All right. If I go and look at my folder where this project is sitting, I will see that I have my original character file, and now I have this new one called character kick. It's all in the same folder. This is a really convenient way as you develop an animation. Keep selecting save as new version. Then you don't worry about managing folders. You don't worry about losing things. It's all in one place. But then as you try things out, you may realize, oh, yeah, that didn't work very well. Go back to a different version, then choose save as new version, save it out as something else, and keep repeating the process. Okay, so now if I want to make my character do something, with my layer collapsed, I will click at frame 1. I will extend out. For now, I will make my exposure go out to 60, so I can click at frame 60 and hit F5 on the keyboard. So now I have a boring animation. Not very exciting. The first thing I want to do to start animating is to click at frame 1 on my peg layer and hit F6. That gives me a starting keyframe. Now I'm going to just click out to an arbitrary keyframe. I'll go say frame 10 and hit F6 again. And this is where we have to reactivate the animate button, the little yellow running man. And notice when it's not active, everything is red when I have the transform tool selected. But when it is active, everything is yellow. So it's showing me a visual reminder of I am ready to animate. I have selected my transform tool. Animate is now turned on. Now if I take my character and want to pull him down, I want to pull everything down. So with my transform tool selected, because I am going to have my character bend down. But to do that, I'm first just going to pull everything down. And if I turn on onion skinning for my layer, I will be able to see where things were. And I can very quickly start to line things up. Now my onion skinning by default is showing me a couple frames in front, a couple behind. I want to go all the way back to the beginning so I can see where I was. Now I have the leg active. And with this leg active, I want to bend it at the knee. So if I hold down Shift and hit B, it moves it down my leg chain. Now if I hit Shift B, it moves the foot. So we can see I've now put a bend in the leg. I'm going to repeat the process for the other leg, where I'm going to not translate it, but rotate it a little bit. And then Shift B to move down my chain. Shift B to, again, move down the chain. And we can see it's now getting a little bit closer. So this leg looks like I've bent it too much, or I need to bend this one a little bit more, which I'm going to kind of do both as part of it to get the result that I want. Now, if I select everything again and pull it down, we can see how we can start lining up the keyframes. Now, if I turn off onion skinning so it's a little cleaner, we'll see how he's now bending to get ready to do a kick. Now, as he's going down, I also want my arm to start moving up. And this is, again, using B and Shift B as a quick and easy way to work your way through your artwork chain. And I think I do need to take the head, and I want the head to start to bend forward, but I'm going to pull the hair up just a little bit as part of the movement. So very quickly we can start to get an interesting sequence. And if I turn this into a loop, it would be a funny little animated GIF. But that's not really what I'm after this time. Character is bending down, and now I want my character. I'll turn back on onion skinning so I can see what is going on. I will click in my timeline and hit F6 to add in a new keyframe. Now at this keyframe, I'm going to start animating my character back up. So I want to click on the leg here, and I think I want to straighten the whole leg. So I'll pull it down, Shift B to work down my artwork chain. This is where I wish I had a foot substitution with a bent toe. So I could now get him up onto his toe, but I don't have that as an option just yet. And I'm going to rotate the head, the arms, and the body, and shift it over a little bit. And now that that's accomplished, select everything and pull it up. So we can see how it starts to create motion, and we're able to cycle through it. You scrub your timeline to cycle through the motion to get a sense of what is happening in the artwork. Now, as it's going up, as the body goes up, it's typical that other body parts are going to come down as they respond to the momentum and movement of the body, and also just for balance. So now we can, if I scrub through, and I think I want to dip the head even a little bit more now at this juncture. It's personal preference as to which selection tool you want to use when you are using the transform tool. Lasso works. Marquee can be a little bit faster when you're trying to choose a lot of layers at once, like in this situation. So I think it's starting to take shape as my animation is now moving forward. F6 for a new keyframe. And now this is going to become part of the more dramatic. Now, I selected a bunch of layers. That means my pivot point is off because it's a pivot point for that group. The transform tool allows me to temporarily relocate a pivot point. So I can relocate that pivot point and then move that whole unit of layers back. So we can see how it's now extending back. So the process of doing this is it's a lot of just move as you work your way through the different body parts to achieve the different forms that you want to show inside your animation. So let's see, it's gone up. Now I'm going to add another keyframe right here, just for doing the head. We'll pull the head back. And I think the hair is begging to move. As well. And it's a good idea to always remember to, technically if you don't hit 6 every time you want to start animating, that's okay. But sometimes you will end up with weird motions and rotations that occur, that it's necessary to force that keyframe on every layer. So if I extend out my layers and look at what's been happening, we will see how I've been now adding these keyframes, these tweens, to all of my layers as they've been happening inside my animation. And if I rewind the whole project, turn off onion skin and hit play, we can see how the character is moving. Now if I don't like the timing on that, this is where using keyframes are really useful, as I can now pull the timing by clicking on a keyframe. I can move that over, and that effectively speeds up the animation. So I think I really like where these final keyframes happen much faster. So if I put that whole chunk really tight at the beginning, it gives me a better response in my animation.